Good evening and welcome to the 57th Climate and Energy Forum. We are thrilled that you are all with us here tonight. We have a great evening planned. It is, as always, a fairly packed house. And I know some people are not happy that we're doing it in this tight a space, but I think this builds community, and that is my goal. You can't build community in a big amphitheater. You build community right here, having beer, eating food, being crammed together. Tonight, we are spending the evening chatting about adaptation. Quick plug for the Good Egg. Thank you, Lena. Thank you for letting us do this here. Big applause. Hopefully everyone will get some food and drink as thanks for being able to use this space for the evening. But I want to start with definitions because no fun evening starts with anything other than definitions. That's how you know it's a fun time. There are two wonky words that are sort of at the basis of everything that the Climate and Energy Forum does. Quick side note. The Climate and Energy Forum is actually a partnership of these 5 island organizations. The reason for the Climate and Energy Forum is to increase our knowledge and dialogue about all things climate, and tonight is a continuation of that. So back to the fun definitions. I know you've been waiting on the edge of your seat. So the two big areas that happen in the world of climate change are mitigation and adaptation. Two terrible words. They mean nothing to most people. But for the purposes of when we talk about that in the context of climate change, mitigation are the actions we take to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that are the root cause of climate change. So that means we stop burning fossil fuels. We stop doing irresponsible land use, but mostly we stop burning fossil fuels. And adaptation are the actions we take to ameliorate the effects of climate change to increase the resilience of our community and the ecosystems that surround us. And this second part is really our focus for tonight because we want to help create a climate-savvy Bainbridge Island by preparing for the effects of climate change. And you're going to get a couple of presentations tonight to do just that so that you will learn about the tools that we have and increase your capacity. So one of the tools that Stacey will be talking about is the Bainbridge Island Climate Impact Assessment. Hopefully you've all seen it by now. It's only been out for 3 years, so we could understand if you hadn't noticed. The second, I've put in a cryptic graphic so as not to ruin the surprise, and James will be sharing that. And then I'll hint a little bit about the climate change adaptation certification, but the most important thing to come out of this night is that not only do you know things about the tools that are available, but you help make the Bainbridge Island Climate Savvy Comprehensive Plan actually implemented by being an informed citizenry. So you will leave here tonight with your official informed citizenry badges. But let's get this started with giving you some information. Sea level rise in us is what I've called your talk for you. I thought you'd like that. And James will be sharing a little project that he's been working on in his spare time as a member of the Climate Change Advisory Committee. Later on, I'll talk about what the committee is doing, and you'll learn that he created work for himself. Yep. James is not only a member of the Climate Change Advisory Committee, he also works for the city of Seattle and is an aspiring high school science teacher. And tonight he will impress us with his ability to teach us about climate change and us.
Someone. Yeah. You ready?
You're up.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Lara. Here's my control. All right, so it's true that I created a little bit of work for myself. Really, when I joined the advisory committee, this is what I wanted to work on. I've been working on this very subject for the city of Seattle for 12 years. It was my master's thesis. It was the reason why I moved to Washington was to study this at the University of Washington. I was lucky to get a job at the city of Seattle, and I considered myself lucky to be here, living now on the island and working here with you to do something about the fact that the Puget Sound is rising and it's accelerating, and we have some opportunities here to do something unique about it, especially compared to Seattle. So some key points right up front. The best available science, the latest science indicates that Puget Sound will rise most likely by 1.5 feet to 3 feet by the end of this century, and that it will be accelerating thereafter. Even if we stop emitting tomorrow, it will keep going. This is one of those impacts that we've already bought into. It means more frequent coastal flooding, king tide events in the winter, a couple times a winter, and then a decade or two later it'll happen every month, and then a couple decades after that it'll be happening a couple times a month. Eventually we will have permanent inundation of some locations. We'll have bluff erosion at the same time, so it's not just about the people who are down living on the waterfront right now, it's about those who are on top of the bluffs. And we'll have saltwater intrusion into some of our water supplies. I do want to say, and I want to say this carefully, the city of Bainbridge Island is exposed, compared to the city of Seattle, where I'm working on this on a daily basis, it's a relatively limited exposure. We're fortunate in that we've only got so many pipes and maintenance holes and facilities that we need to do something about to protect that are critical. But we've got a gazillion waterfront homes, as we know, that are very much exposed. It's a slightly different response. Over there where I work, we are spending lots of money. We have lots of big facilities, costly facilities all over the city. So it's just a different type of exposure. And then, of course, we've got the ferry terminal, we've got the highway and the bridge. We are going to have to work with the Department of Transportation in the state to come up with something together. So we will be able to protect some of our assets here. I think that's reasonable, some of our pump stations, and I'll get into that in a minute. But when it comes to some of our communities and some of our waterfront homes and streets, we're just going to have to retreat. We're going to have to relocate. We're going to have to manage that. We're going to have to do it as prudently as we can. And we're going to have to do it in such a way that aligns with our comprehensive planning processes and our transportation planning and all of the other plans that the city has been working on diligently. So let's move on here. This was a picture that I took standing on Manitou Beach Drive last December. It wasn't really that high of a tide. There happened to be some wind. This was not a very interesting tide, a high tide. But there was a little bit of a wind, and it was pretty bad. I'll show you more pictures later. It's going to be a lot worse. It already is a lot worse in some locations. But I want to go over kind of how, I can go into a lot of detail here, and I have an appendix with lots of information if we have questions later. But I want to share how to think and how I want to work with the city later to help them think about how to approach this. So the first thing you have to do is you have to establish your datum. What level of water do you care about? I think a lot of us are familiar with talking about sea levels with respect to mean high water, mean low water. It works for boating and navigation. It works for fishing. But really, what we care about, I think, is mean high water. On a daily basis, how often is something going to flood? And then there's king tides, of course. Those are astronomical high tides that occur a couple times a year in the winter. So that's one thing that you need to kind of find a common ground on right away is what level of water do you care about? What's the reference point? Then there's observations. What's been happening? So it turns out that the sound has been rising steadily since we started measuring it in 1899 across the way in Seattle. So there's some natural processes at work here. But there is very likely you can already start to see a tiny bit of acceleration, and as we know, science is showing that it will very certainly increase over the next century. We're fortunate here in the Northwest to have studies that are localized for us. You've got your big international studies. I saw a headline today, scientists show 7 feet of sea level rise is possible by 2100. And that is totally true for some locations, but here in the Northwest with our specific geology, our specific winds, we are fortunate to have actually 3 rounds of study. One that happened in 2008 with the Climate Impacts Group at the University of Washington, another one in 2012, and this latest one by the Washington Sea Grant, Ian Miller, and others came up. And the unique thing about that is they came up with projections for 171 locations, including one for Rockaway Beach, one for Fay Bay, and one for Lamolo, and all over the place. So we have a good sense of how different it's going to be, if at all, around the island. Mapping. So the first thing you really do, once you get a handle on what's going on, is mapping. And it's actually not a difficult thing to do. And I've been doing it at the City of Seattle, and that's great. And even as you'll see a little bit later, the climate impacts assessment, the 3-year-old assessment, that's still totally relevant and great. It was done there. So that's an easy thing to do, but then what? Then you got to plan. Then you got to do something about it. You got to incorporate it into your plans, and you have to respond. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The City of Olympia has been doing it for a while. They've got a great plan. Let's just copy them for the most part. We'll tailor it to our unique land here. And I just want to finally say, with respect to how to respond, there's a general framework. You can retreat, you can accommodate, or you can protect. You can fight, you can put things up on stilts and live with water, or you can just get out of the way. So let's first talk about how the City of Bainbridge Island is exposed. That was the specific task for the advisory committee. There are really sort of 3 kinds of areas that we need to think about. Over here is just a list of, it's probably hard to read from back there, but we've got 500 manholes. We call them maintenance holes in the City of Seattle. I'm not judging. We can change that. We've got 13, these are just raw numbers island-wide, right? But actually in the Winslow Sewer Service area, I hand counted up all of the areas that are vulnerable down in the water. There's only 36 of them. That's not too bad. 7% of all of our maintenance holes are at low elevation. We've got 5 pump stations that we need to look at really closely, and we've got a whole bunch of force mains, 11 miles of force mains around the island. A good chunk of that is actually along the water. And then there's the South Island Sewer District. And there's some incomplete information there. We need to actually get down and survey, I think. But all those areas, Linwood Center, Point White, Pleasant Beach, Blakely Harbor, Rockaway Beach, they're all right down there. And they are all serviced by the City of Bainbridge Island there. And of course, we've got our streets. We've got a park or 2. And then there's all the private property. So let's take a look at the map here. So there's the Winslow service area, and here's the South Island district and all the little sub areas that are associated with it. Let's zoom in on Winslow here, and it's a little bit hard to see. There's a bunch of yellow dots. Those are maintenance holes, manholes. You've got the force mains, in some cases already running underwater. And maybe that's okay, right? Maybe they're designed to do that. So part of it is saying, okay, how critical are these assets? What's their design life? How are they supposed to handle with salt water and so forth? We can do that. There are methods to assess their criticality and then help make decisions about what to protect and what to abandon and so forth. In my opinion, it's not bad, especially what I look at on a daily basis, but it's not going to be cheap. South End, I think, it says some missing information in Linwood Center. I think we got to take a good close look at that. But as you can see, Blakely Harbor and Shell Estuary, we've got some critical infrastructure moving right through those areas. Again, that is the bulk. I mean, we got to take a closer look, and we will continue to do that because, again, this is a work item that will feed into a climate action plan, hopefully, that the City of Bainbridge Island will adopt, hopefully in a year or 2. But really, that is the extent of the city's exposure. It's hard to see, but then there's just the obvious. There's all these waterfront homes. There's all of these bluffs. There's many of you, perhaps, are living right on the water, and you're already seeing water come into your property. This here is a very dark, admittedly, picture of Fay Bay. And, this is the driftwood. I'm standing here on the boardwalk, and there's puddles coming in here, and the waves are already crashing into the driftwood that's right there. So that is an aerial of Headley Spit, Point Monroe, and that's my spelling of Fay Bay. And so I didn't use GIS products like I've been doing at the City of Seattle. I think I want to work with the City of Bainbridge Island to do that, to get high resolution information and really, really assess what is going on. What I did is I actually just went to Kitsap Parcel Viewer, looked at the 10-foot contour, the 15-foot contour, and that's what these are right here. 10-foot contour, the purple line, which is basically Fay Bainbridge Park there, and it cuts off at the spit and the end of the spit there. That's already flooding almost on a monthly basis, definitely a few times a year. And it's only going to become more frequent as time goes along. So some pictures here. Again, just a 10-foot tide. This is roughly 1 foot above a daily high tide now. So if you add, like I said, 18 to 36 inches by the end of the century, I'm going to be up to my knees in water with this picture, and all of these houses are going to be submerged. And this is looking down out on the spit. So I drove down there and took some photos. Again, it's December, so it's dark, right? I don't want to put anyone on the spot here. And I've got lots of these pictures. The next area that kind of stands out, Manitou Beach, Murden Cove. You know, I just went out there. I wasn't expecting to see this because, again, it wasn't that high of a tide. But the wind happened to be blowing in the right direction, and it was pushing the waves over the street and into these people's property. And again, I hope, you know, let's work together if this is your house. But this is, you know, this is the leading edge of sea level rise. This is the leading edge of climate change right here. This is our biggest impact. I think that's safe to say, and we are already seeing it. You know, yes, this is just a 10-foot tide. So this has happened throughout history, but this is just going to happen more and more frequently. So you know, those are like the top two areas. Inner Eagle Harbor. So I'm not going to talk about the terminal just yet, the ferry terminal and other assets that are out there on the outer harbor. But you know, think about when you go down Buckland Hill Drive and you go by the Green Light Garage here, and you've got that creek coming over. I mean, that's going to fill up soon, and within 10 years, 20 years, it is going to be underwater on a regular basis, a few hours at a time, half a day, every day. We've got some decisions about how do we spend our money as a community, as an island. What are we going to do about that? Are we going to build a massive culvert? Are we going to build a bridge? Are we going to reroute traffic? What are we going to do about that? Down south. This is interesting, of course, because it's a focal point of development, right? We've got a pump station number 7 right behind the treehouse there. Maybe this is a future site of a great big boardwalk. We build a wall and we put a boardwalk on it, and it connects to Gasm Lake, and it's a wonderful asset for the community. That won't be cheap, but this is perhaps something that we can protect. As I showed you before, it's going to be hard to do because we've got a force main running right over the top of the estuary. So maybe we have to negotiate with those folks living down in Point White who are now being serviced. You know, you cannot say that there are winners and losers when it comes to climate change because we're all losing. I learned that from you, Lara.
It's a message of hope.
But we do have some hard choices to make, and you know, to me, this is a place we are investing a lot right now, and we have to. This is, I think, a pretty easy one to think about. Envision investing in the future in protection. You know, again, that pump station is right around the corner there, so I'm envisioning this nice boardwalk here, connecting to the playground that was just built. You got to trust me here. This is Manzanita Bay, and Bergman comes in here. Dock Street is over there, the road end beach, and then Manzanita goes north. Whenever there's an accident on 305 like there was yesterday, everyone cuts through there. It's not super low, but to me it's an example of a place where we can maybe act with a low impact to the community, and maybe this community living here wants less traffic. Maybe there's an opportunity that's desired where we can have non-motorized, a bike path going right through there. And if you want to cut through the island, then you have to go to Day Road then. So I'm kind of, it was the first thing that stuck out to me when looking at sea level rise on Bainbridge is, okay, well, we just have to close some streets and reroute some arterials. Easier said than done, but I think it's relatively easy. So here's looking at Google Street View here. It's really just only this little stretch in here that's going to start to erode, but it's not a critical asset, or it's something that we can do. So I want to now get into aligning with bigger projects that are going on, and I hope this dovetails nicely with what you're about to hear from Stacey and Lara. But we've got a transportation planning process that's going on. We've got land use planning processes, and here I am sitting on a washed-out beach. Actually, this is owned by the state, and you can walk to it easily from Winslow. But the ferry terminal, right? As I understand it, there was a plan to redo it a few years ago. Then the recession hit, so it's been put on hold. Washington State Ferries, because of sea level rise, is going to have to assess and probably fix every single one of their ports. maybe some of them they can live with for longer. You know, we are eventually going to have to get a new terminal. It's going to have to be built higher. What does that mean? I bring it up because I want to make sure that as an island, we think about where we want to put it and how it's going to fit with the transportation choices that we start planning for. I'd hate to see, you know, just a new, well, you know, yeah, so consolidate Kingston and Bainbridge. Get rid of Southworth, whatever. Like they're going to have to make some hard choices. I would love to see a mosquito fleet out of some of our other, you know, Port Madison and Port Blakely. So those are some decisions that we're going to have to make. And you know, and it's not just about infrastructure either. It's about ecosystem health. There's going to be a lot of culverts that need to be either replaced or just, you know, removed. And there's an opportunity there. WashDOT has some pressure to do something about its culverts because of climate change. We need to see how that fits with sea level rise planning, with transportation planning. And what about opportunities to develop parts of the island that are perhaps untouched? I had the privilege of walking the golf course at the country club on Restoration Point this past weekend. I know. And you know, for those of you who know local geology, it's interesting because it's actually like a double shoreline, right? It raised up with a past event, so it's actually somewhat a little bit of natural resilience built in. Let's put affordable housing on the golf course at the country club, or just let's provide just compensation for houses and neighborhoods that we condemn on this ready-made land, ready to go. You can still keep the houses up top. They can still have their gated community. We'll just move the gate up. I mean, I kid, but I'm not. Like this is just, it's stunningly beautiful, and most of us never get to see it. I wanted to align with, you know, planning for other impacts. I think we might hear a little bit about wildfire risk in a minute here. If someone can tell me after the story behind the stewardship forest on High School Road, I mean, my girls know whenever I drive by, I start drooling because I just love a nicely thinned forest. You know, some of these forests on our island are just these little sticks, and they just need to be cleaned up. It's a wildfire risk. As time goes on, we are going to have a car fire or a house fire, unfortunately, that is going to spill during a drought into the forest, and is going to take off unless we do something like this about it. So let's maybe align our planning for sea level rise, getting people out of harm's way, with efforts like this. I want to just kind of move on here. This was kind of just an overview picture of the island where I wanted to wrap it all up. Again, I think the key points are that exposure compared to other municipalities is relatively limited, but it is still very big. There are a lot of community members who are affected. And we need to work with WashDOT especially because of the ferry and the bridge, which will eventually be replaced too, and the culverts along 305. So, you know, protection is possible. I see some of our pump stations as pretty easy to protect. We could just build a wall around them. We could raise some critical facilities inside. It's just the electrical, whatever. I think that's possible. We've started to do it in Seattle. We can do it in here. We can copy Olympia. I just want to make sure that how we respond aligns with SMART's transportation and land use planning. And I look forward to doing it with you. I look forward to sharing this with City Council next month, getting it into the Climate Action Plan, which they've got up on their board in City Hall. So we're moving here. And you know what? I work for the City of Seattle, but I live here, and I want us to be ahead of them shortly. So thank you.
Take this, hand that to Stacey. Up next is Stacey Norgren with the Bainbridge Climate Impact Assessment.
So my job today is to talk to you about the BiCIA. I will not again tonight say the Bainbridge Island Climate Impact Assessment because it is a mouthful, so BiCIA it is. This already exists. It is already being used in bits and pieces here and there, but our purpose tonight is just tell you the process that we went through as a community to do it, what form it's in today, and what we hope it's used for as we go forward. So Lara and I started this project back in 2015, and we've got really 3 phases of this work. So the first is the BiCIA. The second was the opportunity that we had to take what we did here on Bainbridge for ourselves, for this island, and turn it into a regional guidance document for Puget Sound communities. And fortunately, we got some funding from the Bullitt Foundation. We're able to do that. So that exists as well, and we hope that other communities will do what we did here for Bainbridge. And then lastly, we just completed the climate change adaptation certification, which I will speak to a little bit later. But that product exists now, and it was sort of conceived during our work developing the BiCIA. We got that done, and we're hoping that it gets used and implemented. So eventually we'll get to talk about that in a little bit tonight. But those are our project components. So what did we do for this BiCIA? Generally, we sort of looked at these five adaptation steps. The first was to engage our community and the government. We needed to create a common understanding of climate issues that were relevant to our community. We needed to talk about how to deal with what we've learned in that assessment and incorporate those impacts and implications into our local comprehensive plan, which guides our growth and development going forward. We need to not stop there. We need to then develop climate-savvy codes and regulations across our government operations here on the island. And that was 4 and 5. So often I'm talking to a lot of community planners about this work that we've done. And it's easy for me to say to them that adaptation fits into their day job. It is part of what they need to do. And I would argue to all of you, in any capacity that you find yourself in this room tonight, from city employee to citizen, that this adaptation job is really all of ours. And we're going to help you try to think about ways to incorporate the climate information that we do know into the work that you do already, because it is relevant to all of us. So basically, what planners do and what your city officials do is establish and then implement our goals and policies. And we use all kinds of information every day to do that. We use economic data, build-out analyses, sometimes visioning. We use school enrollment numbers. We use transportation studies. We use all kinds of things that are not set in stone. They're estimates, they're projections. And these are these same kinds of information that climate data is. And frankly, we could probably argue, and Lara could argue very well, I'm sure, that the climate data is ready to go. There are things that we know there's no reason to wait. So we need to ask ourselves why we're not using climate data as another input into all of the decision making that we do. We want you to think about the activities that you undertake. If you're a planner, a manager, if you deal with infrastructure, make finance choices, if you set regulations, if you're educating anybody, you want to think about, again, where those climate data are relevant, and frankly, it's relevant everywhere. We have this local document that it lays out our impacts and implications for us here on the island, so we hope that you pick this up, you work your way through it, and you use it and apply it to the choices and the decisions that you are making. So just again, the 3 goals of the BiCIA. We needed to understand the impacts of climate here on the island. We needed to translate those impacts into the implications, and we did that under the context of the comprehensive plan. And we sorted it by comprehensive plan element just to make it clear and hopefully readily usable by our local officials. Backing up 3 years to 2015, hopefully some of you guys might have been at or remember the workshop that we held at the City Hall that EcoAdapt put on, where we started this community engagement process. But the other things that we did to create this document were to look through all of the available climate change science. We used the regional assessments, national assessments, and whatever other tools made sense. We looked at every comp plan element within the Bainbridge Island plan. We created an element brief, sort of synthesizing all of that information and explaining how it impacted each element. We used the community elicitation information that we got, and voila, we have a Bainbridge Island BiCIA. What that does is it has 3 things. It's meant to be this input into your comprehensive plan process. It is also now a tool that we have available to us. And again, we used it as a document as sort of the foundation to help us build more regional climate work as well. So what we realized as we were doing this was that the climate impact assessment alone wasn't enough. And what was happening at the time that we started this process was the local comprehensive plan update. So we kind of morphed our process as we went. And what we found we spent the bulk of our time doing was redlining every 2004 section of the Bainbridge Island comp plan, and we went through it with a climate lens, and we used the element briefs that we created where they explained how climate impacts affected the different elements of the comp plan. We packaged that all together and turned it into this redlined information and suggestions basically to the city staff and the city council about how to incorporate specific climate-informed language into the next round of our comp plan. And to my knowledge, my understanding, most of it was adopted and accepted and now lives on in our comp plan. So that seemed to be a pretty worthwhile undertaking in the end. So the first part of the BiCIA lays out and discusses the climate information. And I'm not going to go into all of that, but we need to understand this common language about the climate and what's actually happening here. So the BiCIA discusses the temperature, it discusses precipitation. We talk about wildfire, which James mentioned. And actually, let me pause here for a minute. This map is a little scary when you look at it. It lives in the fire department. I can't remember the name of their document, but we got this not from the city planning office, but from the fire department. And it was sort of one piece of information that rang some bells in our heads and said, we need to use this document as a way to coordinate all of the information, all of the risks and vulnerabilities that we have here on the island to make sure that the city planning office knows about the wildfire risks when they're developing or not developing certain parcels across the island. So the BiCIA can be used as a place where all of this information clearly explains and lays out the risks to our island. So again, some more of the inputs. So now it gets a little wordy, and I'm a little scared here to show you the next slides, but this is sort of the bulk of the BiCIA. So the way that it's organized, we've done an assessment by element that has an overview, for example, of land use and how land use and climate intersect. It has an overview of how transportation and climate intersect. For each element, we've done that sort of overview. And then we have an implications table, which is a little scary looking, and I know you can't see it, but I do want you to know you can see this online, you can find a copy of the document, and this is really the heart of what we need you guys to take and to read and to try to use. So, and we're here to help you figure out how to use that. But the way this is sorted is by climate impact, and we looked at precipitation, temperature, vegetation, sea level, slope stability, population changes, and transportation plans. And then for each of those climate impacts, we discuss what sort of implications that specific climate factor will have in this element area. We also created essential questions for every element. And we hope that this might have a second life today as we talk about these plans and as this group meets and as you guys go back and try to think about climate and try to factor it into your work. We have made you a little cheat sheet here. These are questions that you should go through whenever you're making a decision to ask and say, they're basically the climate questions. Anything you're thinking about doing, any choice you're making, ask the climate questions and say, am I making a choice that's going to hold up and do what I'm intending this to do 50 plus years from now, whatever your time horizon is? So these aren't rocket science. They're pretty simple, pretty obvious when you really get down to it. But I think we all probably could agree that in reality, a lot of the climate questions are not being asked at all. It's sort of, it's a way to bring climate to the forefront of any choice that's being made by any local board, by any group that you're on, ask those climate questions first. And if you walk into a room armed with a BiCIA, or you walk into a city council meeting, or you walk into a design review board committee meeting, or an affordable housing meeting, whatever meeting you're going to that has a community interest at stake, bring this document, bring these questions, and ask them up front. Because if we don't have answers to those questions, we aren't making responsible decisions. So our hope is that the BiCIA can lead to this sort of questioning, this sort of upfront responsibility of dealing with the implications of climate change that we know are going to come here. The third big part of what exists in the BiCIA is the implication chart. And again, it's sorted by comprehensive plan element, and I keep using land use here as the example, but it shows mitigation actions, it shows adaptation actions, and then it has implementation ideas. This was used to really guide a lot of the language that we drafted for the COBE, for the comprehensive plan update. So again, these are also things that you can use, hopefully, in your work in whatever arena you do work in. One thing that I mentioned earlier was the climate change assessment certification and how, excuse me, for Lara and I, that became really phase 3 of the work that we did. And when we started this, we didn't know that that's where we were headed, but it was pretty clear that we needed a way to get there. Once we understood the impacts and the implications, we needed a way for people to assess those on a specific project. So one thing, when you do look through the BiCIA, you will see for most of the implementation actions, for most of the land use elements, it does say develop this climate assessment certification. The BiCIA also recommends these 3 actions that beyond just the comp plan update, we really think the community would benefit from doing here. The first action that we recommended in the report was to create a climate change task force. Yay. It wasn't what we planned. If you actually sit down and read this, what we had, our top recommendation was for the city to create a climate change task force that was made up of city staff. Christy Carr, for example. Sorry, Christy. You can't hide. But the point is, the decisions that are made every day at City Hall are done by staff. Yes, they're guided by the comp plan, they're guided by the larger documents. But if the city staff, the city council, and everybody on all of the boards understands all of the climate information and is held accountable to that information on a daily basis, it becomes ingrained as part of their day job, so to speak, of what one of their initial asks whenever they're in a project meeting or making some sort of decision. If the planning commissioners had to ask these questions, these climate questions of a developer, that might lead to better outcomes. Things like that. So we do have a climate change task force, and it's a great step forward. It wasn't what we envisioned originally, but we'll get there. So the second was to develop and require the use of a climate change adaptation certification. And that's what I kind of drilled on a couple slides ago on the implementation chart as something that we needed to have done. Again, it's the way to really certify that you have looked at a project, a choice, or a decision through the climate lens, and at the end of the day, you have said, we will do no harm down the line. So, and then the last action that the BiCIA recommends is to really apply your understanding of this. So, not just most of us aren't city employees, but we do make decisions and choices all the time. So our hope for the BiCIA, beyond government actions, is that you will take this information and you'll find ways to apply it in the work that you guys all do every day. And I think we'll all be, as a community, better off in the end if we're able to do that. We also have in there just a couple things you guys can do. Inform yourselves. Actually go and read this BiCIA that I keep harping on. Help the city incorporate the comp plan and the climate savvy goals and policies that are in it. So we ask you to arm yourselves with the BiCIA, go to city meetings, take it with you, bring it up. Don't stop. I don't know. There's a lot to do. And again, or lastly, I guess, make your own climate savvy decisions at home and at work. So think about this in your day-to-day life, which I'm sure if you're in this room, you probably do anyway, but it can't hurt to say it. Leave one in your neighbor's mailbox just for kicks if they, I don't know. I'm going to end here. This now exists. It's a climate change adaptation certification tool. It's ready to be customized and used. And Lara and I would love to help you do that. So I'm going to stop there, and Lara's going to come up and take it from here.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the last stretch of it, how many of the members of the Climate Change Advisory Committee are here? That's awesome. We don't have a quorum, which means we're not in trouble. Although this was officially listed or whatever. Noticed. This was officially noticed. So I'm Lara Hansen. I'm the Chief Scientist and Executive Director of EcoAdapt. We're a nonprofit on the island. I'm also on the Climate Change Advisory Committee, and I'm on the board of Sustainable Bainbridge. Bingo. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the Climate Change Advisory is doing in relation to predominantly climate change. So the Climate Change Advisory Committee has a proposed work plan. This has not yet been whatevered. And it has three components. It has components about mitigation, and the goal there that we have listed is that by 2040, Bainbridge Island will reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 90% compared to 2013 levels, with an interim goal of reducing greenhouse gases by 25% by 2030 and 60% by 2033 compared to 2013 levels. So there you have that. We have a mitigation goal of Bainbridge Island is climate savvy and can withstand the impacts of climate change. For example, sea level rise, warming temperatures and changing precipitation patterns, and changing vegetation. Don't know why that end is where it is. That's directly out of our document. We should proofread that. And then finally, community engagement is the City of Bainbridge Island inspires action across the community and partners with local and regional organizations to take meaningful climate change mitigation and adaptation actions. So you can look at all of this. It is all available on the city's website for your convenience, but I will be sharing more with you about what we're planning to do in the adaptation space. The exciting thing here is that we have not even had our work plan approved, and we've already done a whole bunch of work. The work under adaptation falls into two categories. One is vulnerability assessment, so that's understanding the problem, and the second is risk reduction, that's doing something about it. So in the vulnerability assessment, someone should map the climate impact to Bainbridge Island assets in the community, starting with sea level rise. So that gets a big check mark of done. Hold community discussions around these maps. Kind of done. We'll do more in-depth ones with bigger maps. And we'll go on a field trip for a king tide event. Bring your life jacket. Create a tool for use in the evaluation of the vulnerability of COBE and non-COBE assets and activities on Bainbridge Island. Oh, look, we did that. Reduce risk. We want to incorporate the vulnerability about that tool that I just showed you that doesn't exist yet into the COBE workflow to identify vulnerability and risk reduction opportunities. That means things that are done by departments, by committees like ours, but other committees, and by council. So everyone should be on board using this to evaluate the decisions that are being made, whether they're things that capital investments or other kinds of investments or permits or whatever. We'd also like to see pathways to applying that vulnerability evaluation tool to all non-COBE projects to get the same effects. How do you identify vulnerability and reduce risk? And then finally do community training on risk reduction processes. Because one of the key components of this, which was alluded to in both James and Stacey's talks, is that making the decisions that we need to make is going to require that we as a community have a common vision of what we want that to be and that we come to some agreement. I mean, James was sort of jokingly showing people's property saying, sorry if this is your property, don't mean to be calling you out. But the point of the matter is that those are our neighbors, and the cost of that will have two effects. The cost of the impact to their property will be felt by them, and it will also be felt by all of us because there are associated costs when things become hazards. And we focused a lot tonight on sea level rise, which is probably the most dramatic impact we will be seeing as an island, but it is not the only one. We will be affected by changing precipitation patterns. We will be affected by increasing temperature. We will be affected by changing vegetation as a result of the combination of those two things. We didn't even put the slope stability maps with your sea level rise maps to show the just add to this. The BiCIA, I'd like to point out, does have several of those for your viewing pleasure. So there's a lot we have to do, and we have to start having those conversations. So quickly, just to let you know about this tool, because it actually is a fairly simplified thing. I've got a couple of copies here. One of them is promised. But it's a 3-step process that does 3 things, as listed on the beautiful cover page. One is to misspelled identify, because I made this slide 20 minutes before I got here. We need to identify the potential climate change risks. So it goes through and it has this incredibly simple 2-page handout with check boxes. It's a worksheet, and you just have to determine whether or not that applies to what you're doing. The second thing is you go through and you actually use the kinds of climate science that both James and Stacey talked about to do little worksheet evaluations of that risk being directed toward the science you need in order to understand how the risks will affect your lives and the environment around you. And then to determine what we can do to reduce the risk, that being the most important part. And there are some suggestions in there. So suppose someone does want to build something in a risky coastal region in this day and age, despite the fact that we know that it's a terrible idea. Do they have to pay a bond so that it can be fixed later to ameliorate the problem? Maybe that's something we do. Or we just say, no. You go Nancy Reagan on me, huh? Yeah, okay. So if you want to take a look at this, I have one more copy up here that can be perused, but it's available online at cakex.org/adaptation certification. CakeX is something that EcoAdapt runs. It's the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange. It's a huge database that can show you what other communities around the country are doing. So now, this is really what we wanted to do with you for the next 40 minutes, is to have to start having conversations around what does all of this mean to us? Because people tend to look at all the impacts of climate change and then go home and do something else. And we're not going to let you do that. We're going to make you stay here and sort of face what we've been talking about. Perhaps we'll just start with sea level rise, because better than starting nowhere at all. And James gave us data, and figure out what should we be doing, because you've got these 3 tools. You've got some data that you've been given by James that is specifically made for our island. You have these other 2 tools, one of which specifically outlines all the impacts, and you have a climate savvy comprehensive plan. There are not a lot of communities in the United States that have a climate plan that is good to go for incorporating climate change actions. And you're a climate-informed citizenry, so we should be able to start chatting about this. Oop, no, that was right. So a couple conversation starters that I made up earlier. James and Stacey may have others, but let's talk about things like how much risk is Bainbridge Island willing to accept? Who will pay for the adverse effects of climate change on Bainbridge Island, and how do we pay for this? And what can we do to reduce our collective risk if, in fact, we decide we're not willing to accept that much risk? Why don't we take like 5 minutes worth of questions from the presentations first, and then I'd like to dive into exploring these, because we could keep asking questions for a long time, and that's a great strategy for not doing things, but we don't have the luxury of that kind of time. So any questions?
What is the effect on saltwater intrusion on our water supply?
Yeah, well, I'll just start by saying I think a lot of you are aware that there's a lot of concern about our water supply in general on this island with growth and development. And there have been some studies to, I think, allay some of those concerns. And with the future of rainfall, it doesn't seem to be, I think I'm not too concerned about that. We do need to look at it, monitor some more. But that said, from the edges, there will be an increasing salinity. You know, as the water table will start to creep inland, and you know, I think it's just going to have to be part of the future of monitoring. But I can't speak specifically to the mechanics of. I wish I could, but it's you know, we're a big, relatively large island. I think I don't know is the answer.
One other thing I wanted to, I get, as facilitator, I get facilitator's opportunity. Your map didn't show anything about our favorite topic of this afternoon, people who aren't on the major sewer systems, people who have septic, leach fields.
I mean, it's just a lot of potentially failed septic systems eroding into the sound.
Let's map it.
And something we can map. We can map that. Just like you have all those maintenance holes all over the place, you're just going to have a bunch of little septic systems. Yeah, that's erosion. We really didn't get into bluff erosion, but big problem.
Bluff erosion or saltwater intrusion into septic systems. Yes.
Have you been working with the emergency management coordinator and the SAGE with the city? Because as you were showing some of the pictures of washing over the road down to the south end of the island, I know they are preparing to figure out where should we put a shelter in case of emergency, where do we put the hubs where neighborhoods can convene and such. It seems like they really need to know this kind of information, and I don't know if they're thinking.
Question about are climate-y people, and perhaps you're picking on the Climate Change Advisory Committee, I'm going to hand this to you as quickly as I can, doing anything with emergency manager? Oh, excellent.
So this isn't about the Climate Action Committee, but your question raises a good point in my head for all of us to think about right now. So the climate advisory members are volunteers. The Bainbridge Island Climate Impact Assessment was done a few years ago, and that's over. So we are as much volunteers as all of you. So it's not, so your question just got you hired. So, so where I feel like this night and part of this community conversation needs to go is all of us thinking about things like you just did, which is an excellent point. So who is the one to go to the emergency manager and ask that climate question? You are. So seriously. Excellent. You got it. So I think that's one thing that would be really positive for coming out of this conversation tonight is if there are opportunities of actions going on in our city that we need to bring this climate information to, let's make a list of what those are and let's identify the volunteers who are all going to go do that. So.
Love that. Fran.
James, you mentioned the threats to homes, manholes, pumps, the ferry. How about our electrical facilities? How is our electrical system is it vulnerable?
Yeah, the question is our electrical system vulnerable to sea level rise? And from what I've seen, most of the assets are pretty high above sea level. We'd have to be careful with looking at how many of those transmission lines, et cetera, get close to the water's edge. There's probably a few spots that we have to be careful about it. But in general, it comes across by the bridge and then stays generally across the top of the island. It's vulnerable to other climate impacts for sure. But to sea level rise, I think it's probably not as bad as some other infrastructure.
They're talking about putting in some kind of charging station as the ferries electrify. That sounds like it could be vulnerable.
Yeah, so if Washington State Ferries moves forward with their plan to put the charging station in, let's hope that it is done in a way that is flexible and adaptive and can move with whatever they decide to do in the future. And it's not just about the terminal too; it's about the whole maintenance facility, which is they're gonna have to do something about that too.
I would love to chat about this first question about how much risk we are comfortable accepting as an island. I'm also happy to talk about great ideas people have for things that they want to volunteer to take on, because I love the fact that we're now just hiring everybody. Add this to your resume. Comments? I don't think this will get very far, but I'll give it a go for people up front.
I used to subscribe to the weekly City of Bainbridge Island list of permits for building. I had to stop reading it because it seemed like about at least 50%, maybe higher, were permits that were being given waiving the requirements for setbacks on the shoreline on steep slopes. And I keep thinking, who's going to pay for that?
Yeah, so, I mean, that's exactly what gets us to the second question, is that there are a whole host of vulnerabilities that are being set up in our community by the kinds of decisions that are made with permits that will then eventually become community hazards. Because when properties become uninhabitable because they either have water in them or they are on a slope that has given way, people are not always held responsible for said property, especially if it has a mortgage associated with it and they just leave rather than deal with the cost of repairing it, especially if it's underinsured. Coupled then with the fact that all of these properties in the not too long term probably won't be insurable for an array of things. Already flood insurance is not a real commodity, probably particularly not if it's a sea level rise flood event, I'm assuming.
The Shoreline Master Plan is approaching its update cycle, and so that potentially is an opportunity for the community to get together, provide input, and say, no more.
Just yell.
The Shoreline Master Program is under review right now. Thursday's Planning Commission meeting will have an update that Christy Carr will present for what's immediately ahead of us. It's open to study, review at fairly deep levels. The language that will identify climate change risks and impacts and so on, that needs to be examined, and there's always room for improvement in that document, which is very important to the community, controversial in the minds of some people. It's a very hard job that the Planning Commission has been not mired in, but involved in for a long time, and there's more to do. So, Christy, you might want to say something about it. I don't know.
Thanks. Actually, Lara and I and James and I have talked about this because one of the goals of the periodic review of the SMP is to integrate sea level rise and other climate change impacts into the SMP. And actually, no community, Olympia has done a lot of great planning, but to my knowledge, no community in the Sound has done a really good job of integrating these topics into their SMP, so we're really looking forward to that opportunity. And we're hoping that these topics span similarly to their work in the comprehensive plan across all of the topic areas in the Shoreline Master Program. So I do invite the community to be involved. We are underway, sort of. It's a soft launch on Thursday night at the Planning Commission, but we will be at the Planning Commission through the summer, at least, or probably into early fall. So you can always check the city's website and look at Planning Commission agendas, and please do come and participate because we need your input on it. And we actually have an intern, Tiara, who's here this summer working specifically on this project, among a couple of other things. So we are pretty serious about it, and so I need everybody's help, really, and appreciate the opportunity. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me or come to a meeting. They're fabulous.
Yeah, I think it's confusing for people, or it's easy for people to not take action because we're always using the big number 100. And, for us selfish folks, hell, I'm dead, I don't care. And, and yet we are seeing, because of that mindset, we are seeing the fact that it's here, it started. We all know if we have another summer, couple summers like we had last summer, our cedars are going to go. And, you know, my community, my street, when we're talking about earthquakes, we're talking about how we're going to get the heck off this island and into the water quick because of the potential for fires. And we don't like to talk about it because we love our trees, but it's frightening. And it's happening soon, now. So how do we get it in a little bit more to the present without making us all feel we ought to leave the island quick, but, you know, reasonably, and, you know how are we going to treat our trees? What are we going to think in terms of our trees? Helping us, or are they scaring us?
Just for point of clarification, the fire will not be caused by the trees. It will be caused by your house or car. So I propose we all live in tents.
You know, we joke about the clear-cut Bainbridge Island bumper stickers that we occasionally see. Obviously, we don't want to do that for the third time, but we should thin the island. We really should. I think it'll be just like I showed that slide of the stewardship forest. We've just got a lot of junk fuel at the bottom of our prized trees. There might be some privacy concerns with that. There might be some just fear that, you know, that black-throated gray warbler won't have its nest anymore. But I think overall, I think studies show that a thin forest is a healthy forest and a resilient forest to fires. And so I'd love to see some kind of action, legal action to, you know, require thinning of the entire island. And we could even do stuff with the wood that we cut. But I think we just have to be a little more realistic about what our trees, and not only just that, and we can start replanting too, and replanting, say, coastal pine, for example, a tree that is appearing like it'll be more resilient to this future climate that we're seeing, and just look at trees. I know that, you know, speaking from experience at the City of Seattle, we are dealing with this in our watersheds, in the Cedar River watershed in the Cascades. We're looking south for seeds. We're looking at what grows well in southern Oregon, because that's what should grow well here pretty soon. And how does that respond to fire? So we should do that here in the island too. Let's thin and start replanting with resilient species.
Obviously it's going to take, I mean, we've got people here who howl because we're trying to get people out of their cars and building a walk and a biking path that's safe for people. And the fact that 4 trees are going to be cut to decrease emissions, they're up in arms, can't touch trees. So obviously it's going to take a lot of us growing up and facing some facts.
Yeah, you know, I also don't want to wait to that first fire, because that's what it'll take. You know.
You, sir, in the back.
Me, sir. Thanks for calling me sir, first of all. I just wanted to throw in actually to both conversations. The Parks District, I'm pushing talking about climate change, and other people are too. And there's going to be an opportunity in June. We actually have our own comprehensive plan process. And that's an opportunity. It's a 6-year plan. We set the agenda of what we're going to spend our money on. And it's an opportunity for all of you to bring your considered opinions to the Park District and to let them know that they should be planning for climate change. It's an opportunity to address things like the fire hazard, which our parks actually have some of the highest fire hazard ratings in the whole island in terms of the effects of climate change. So I really encourage you all to participate. For the Park District, it's a little new to be thinking about climate change, but we're going to be talking about things like how do we electrify our fleet, how do we, or do we consider going to independent energy, that is putting up solar panels and being self-sustaining. So, yeah, the success of it is really going to depend on the community stepping up and letting the Parks Department know that, or excuse me, district know that they have support.
So that's that's the month of June is comment period. There's a couple work sessions and things like that. And then on the third Thursday, which is of the month, we are also going to have a discussion session on climate change right now. It's tentatively scheduled. I encourage all of you to come there. I encourage you to come and give your comments about what you think the Park District should do in terms of climate change, resiliency, and adaptation. So please participate.
Quick point of clarification. The map that Stacey showed actually isn't fire hazard risk related to climate change. That's fire hazard risk of the island without climate change. And the model is really kind of, it is skewed toward where are there trees on the island. Is that really the most fire-prone part of our island? It's where fires can propagate because there's more contiguous fuel, but there are good things that are more likely to burn all over, says someone standing in a building that recently had a fire. Can you moderate for a second?
Okay, so now I'm moderating. Do we have any questions? Any more questions? Sure.
The fact that the climate impact assessment includes both mitigation measures and adaptation measures is interesting, and I'm just kind of wondering if you find from a policy perspective that adaptation conversations are easier than mitigation conversations. In other words, if you say sea level rise is coming, it's kind of happening regardless of climate change, but it's going to be accelerated by climate change, it's coming, it's going to happen. We don't have to talk about why, we just need to plan for this. Because that seems like an easier conversation in our political environment. Do you find that to be true?
I struggle to talk about adaptation. I mean, I think politicians and a lot of us who are trying to do good focus on the emissions and reducing our footprints and electrifying and emissions targets and Paris Agreement, et cetera. There's a lot of political will. A lot of political capital that gets spent on mitigation, and the adaptation conversation it's easier to envision. It's easy because it happens to us now, but I think it's a lot more difficult to do something because it requires spending huge amounts of capital or moving people. Do you want to add to that?
It may be helpful to reframe the adaptation starter conversation as community risk. And if you talk about vulnerable populations, you talk about social equity, you talk about economies that are at risk, you talk about, I don't know, whatever, many other kinds of risk that there are. But when you start reframing the conversation, you could almost deal with climate adaptation without talking about climate change. I don't like to say that, but I think if you frame it as a way into that conversation, you can get a lot of support on, a lot of political support, because people want to protect the populations they're responsible for, we hope. So if you approach it from that angle rather than we must act on climate change, depending on your audience, if you can get buy-in, then you can start having those other conversations, which unfortunately are harder for some people. So I don't know, do what you can to at least have them not walk out the door right away.
You know, as I sat here and listened to your presentations, I was thinking, wow, this is really cool to be on Bainbridge, where we're really digging into these things and we're really planning. Then as we go a little further, it sort of seems to drop out that most all of the things that I'm sort of getting really excited about and delighted about are done by citizen voluntary action. And then there's a question, is the city really aligning behind and supporting what you're doing, or are the rumors about how our city government is very incompetent come into play here?
Except for Christy, she's in
Okay. As a employee of a different government, let me just say that It has been a delight working with city staff here. And so I work with a massive government compared to this one, and these guys are great. And I will also say that Bainbridge has been great. Super responsive and helpful, and curious, and so that's I don't worry about that. Now the electeds, they helped form our committee. They encouraged us to come to this. They're asking for us to present this very information next month at the council meeting. The climate action plan is on the board. They've kind of ignored it because of the police station and other things for a while, but it's coming up. A council meeting or two ago, there was a little bit of pressure, I think, to get it moving. I think our city manager has suggested that we should get moving on it. So from my perspective, as a advisory committee volunteer, I've been impressed, and as a member of this community, I don't see incompetence, just for the record. So.
That said, the comprehensive plan with guidance in it on how to incorporate climate change became a reality several years ago. And we have not seen a groundswell of citizen demand for specifically what that should be. So this is on all of us to be in there. I used to go to more of them, but then I became lonely. A ridiculous number of city council meetings where I would there'd be some other thing on the agenda that I wasn't there for, but I'd pop up and ask a question about climate change, and no one ever followed up and said, yeah, more of that. It was sort of dead silent. So we need people there asking that question as well. So before everyone leaves the room, we only have 10 minutes left. Okay, we've got 2 more questions. Oh, good God, there's 4 of them now.
As a person involved, engaged with city government but not elected, the first comprehensive plan was created in 1994.
1492.
1994. Many of the measures in that and subsequent updates were never implemented effectively. That implementation commitment is very strong. We've made real progress. There's a lot more that needs to be done, but there's political will within City Hall. There's been a deficit of citizen engagement in the process.
Yep.
People are happy with disillusionment, happy with skepticism and cynicism, and if that floats a boat, that's fine, but it's not right, because I've never seen the city working more energetically and effectively. There are storms that are overblown in the Bainbridge Review. We don't get the truth out very effectively because there's not much help from the community itself. There's an awful lot of chatter and side commentary in social media, and it's detrimental. So I'm just saying, from somebody more or less in the middle of things, I like what's been happening, and I'm optimistic about the future.
So just as a follow-up to John's comments, I think what is lacking is the average citizen stepping up to say, we want this, because as a former Planning Commission member for 11 and a half years and also involved in other planning activities, what we tend to see are the naysayers, the people who come in and have an axe to grind, rather than the average person who really cares but who hasn't bothered to come in and support what the city's trying to do. So this is just a follow-up comment to suggest that what this group is asking for is that all of us take some time to support the efforts in moving in the right direction.
Can I get an amen? You're up.
Yeah.
This will make it.
For the Climate Advisory Council, and one of the things I'm curious about is, as you sort of have all these discussions and you're putting a climate action plan together, is there beginning to be any identification of sort of breakthrough policies, cornerstone policies, if you will, that will get us 80% of the way there, and we would then sort of one by one bring to the council over the next decade? Or
I could pick two. One, on the mitigation side, when we update our franchise agreement with PSE, we need 100% renewable energy that's additive to their mix. So that gets us to 100% on all of our electricity. Check. We don't have to wait till 2045, which is a ridiculous amount of time to wait. And the other one is we need to start evaluating every permit and every expenditure to make sure that it is climate smart. And that could happen really like next week. So we don't need a decade. We could do 90% of the work. We could do 75% of the work in a month and a half if we wanted. Is there another? Oh, did anyone else want to?
I thought it was brilliant.
Thanks. Barbara.
Thank you. I just wanted to build upon a couple of these other comments about forests. Next year in March, a number of people in the room already know about it, the ABC, Association of Bainbridge Communities, will host their annual environmental conference. It's usually held in Island, but it will be next year as well. And the topic next year is going to be stewarding our forests, our island forests, through climate change. And the Bainbridge Island Parks Foundation applied for a grant that hopefully will bring funding so we can bring more experts to the island. Because I think we do see a lot of forest die-off, and we know there are fire risks. Some people want to, do a lot of thinning, but we also know that saving our forests and preserving the vegetation has their carbon sequestration, and so the adaptation mitigation is going to be a really complicated thing. But we all see forests dying, or trees dying around us. We have a lot of healthy forests too, and we all want to know what to do. I think even on our own properties or in the park district, we have large forests. So if you're interested in getting involved in helping us find some of those experts, get in touch. Parks Foundation or with Lara or with Christy. She's president of Sustainable Bainbridge. This is a collaborative effort of a lot of nonprofits on the island.
Excellent. Okay. We have 5 minutes, and I'm going to do the fastest speed round of something I've ever done. I want everyone in this room to say what organization or public entity they're going to go to in the next 2 months and start asking climate questions of, starting in this corner. Okay, unfair, I can pick on someone else. James, you're up.
Well, I kind of wanted to talk to the governor. I hear he's running on a climate platform. And I am curious as to whether or not, as we enter this shoreline management review process, we are getting support and guidance from the state in doing this in a climate-sensitive way. I don't know the answer to that, but that's what I'm going to ask Jay next time I see him.
Right on. Who is our next committer?
If there's a discussion with PSE about the electrification of the Washington State ferries and what they want to put on our island, I will be at that meeting and I will raise this issue.
Include a note with your bill as well.
June 6th is the tentative date.
June 6th is a tentative date.
Yes, PSE extinction.
Excellent, you found the new date. Okay, next.
The Coalition of Bainbridge Repairs, Kobe Emergency Manager, and the Fire Department.
Excellent.
To bring all of this together, and maybe have you guys invited to the talk.
We are all always happy to come.
And the Bainbridge Library under the label of the Bainbridge Repairs talks.
Brilliant. Who else? Come on, I'm not going to let people leave until everyone commits.
Squamish Tribe. So we
Oh,
get our
excellent.
indigenous leaders involved.
Right on, and there's so many fantastic resources. I also run the National Adaptation Forum, and one of the largest groups of participants we have is from tribes across the country, and what tribes are doing is way ahead of where we are. Squamish Tribe hasn't been doing as much, but they're starting to do more on it, and if we did it as partners, that would be even more awesome. Right on. Anybody else?
Okay, so I don't live on Bainbridge anymore, I used to.
But you live somewhere.
Yeah, I live in Squamish. But I'm going to talk to, I'm interested in what you've done with the comprehensive plan. And I'm going to talk to the county because the county's going to have to update their comprehensive plan. And they should be taking some of these things into account with that. That's all.
Right on.
Will the affordable housing development on Suzuki property be considering climate change in their design?
Great question. You'll go talk to them.
Yes.
All right, I'm cheating a little because I'm already trying to do this, but, so I'm on the climate
You'll
change
still get
committee.
credit.
And I also chair the Bainbridge Island Watershed Council. We are a citizen group committed to citizen science and outreach on water resource issues. And we work closely with the city, and I'm really interested in fostering more conversation with both Kobe Water Resources and KPUD and the major water purveyors on this island, because I think we need to start having some really innovative approaches to how we manage both sewer and water. And we're not there yet, and there's a lot of work to be done. And I'm also going to pitch, if you're not above your head with a sea level of knowledge yet, another wonderful resource is the city's water resources program has done a ton of work on their groundwater management. The technical advisory committee for the city is in the process of doing a groundwater management plan. There are a host of resources available to understand better what our groundwater resources are and where they can and should be going. So that's what I want to work on.
Right on. Who's next? Surely somebody's going to go to some meeting and ask someone a question. You can text me and I'll text you the question.
Multimodal Transportation Advisory. You know, in this adaptation thing, the notion that some places where we have roads, they're not going to be hospitable for roads, 50 years from now. It seems like a pretty easy and straightforward conversation. Moving significantly away from car-based transportation to prevent further climate change is a harder conversation, but it's worth continuing to have.
Check out the example of San Francisco's Ocean Beach project. They're moving the entire road back behind Golden Gate Park. The front road will cease to be a parking lot and a road, and it will become a bike and pedestrian pathway.
I've talked to our representatives in Senator Christine Rolfes, Sherry Appleton, and Drew Hansen about what to do next after the legislative session.
We need an adaptation session.
Sure.
Right on.
Island Center sub-area planning. We are meeting tomorrow, and I'm going to be meeting with some people before that, and this is something that we can keep looking at.
Excellent. Can I recommend a series of questions in front of this? Who else?
Well, there was an earthquake this morning at 4 a.m., somewhere between 3 and 4 on the Richter scale. Just so you know. Offshore.
Are you going to ask that about climate change?
I'm just throwing it in.
Curveball.
Right on. Oh, yeah, no, I've got. Keep going. Oh, Erica, and person behind Erica, then Erica.
Well, I'm running for city council, and this is one of my major issues, and I'll make sure that this is at every forum that I can influence, and certainly at every door I knock on.
Right on. Okay, Erica, you're up now.
I just want to say, for people who don't go to these meetings and speak up at city council, this is the beauty of a small town. You can't do this in a big city. You get 3 people together, and they can have a big effect on decisions in city council.
Good or bad?
Yeah, we need new people talking about climate. There's a couple of us in here, and every time we come up, they know it's going to be climate. We need you new people to come up and talk about this, and it'll have an effect. It's incredible the effect you can have.
So you're going to ask people to ask about climate?
Absolutely.
Right on.
Constantly.
Anybody else?
I'm going to edit and post a video of this meeting on YouTube.
Bainbridge Island needs an electric car super recharge station, and I see a lot of Teslas around. I'm going to contact Tesla and see that they at least think about that and have it solar powered so they don't use electric.
Excellent.
So as Climate Action Bainbridge, we interview all of the city council candidates for every election. So we're going to get these people on the front end of the coming into city government and we're going to endorse the one who we feel takes climate change adaptation and mitigation most seriously. So I would invite all of you, when we start having those interviews with people, to come to our monthly Climate Action Bainbridge meetings if you want to talk to the city council candidates yourself and ask them questions.
Okay, can I get 3 more people to commit to things? Excellent. Power in numbers. Anybody else? There we go.
I'm going to ask Puget Sound Restoration Fund, Hema Hema and Taylor, if we can just start putting oysters all the way around the whole island to protect against wave run-up and wave energy. Okay.
Okay, Meridell and James will be meeting in the parking lot after this. Anybody else? Anybody else? Stacey and I have also applied for a grant from the Bainbridge Community Foundation to be able to provide support to other nonprofits and agencies around the island who want to incorporate climate into what they're doing but don't have the funds to do it. So that's something we're trying to do.
I just gotta know who's opposed to oysters.
I don't think she's against oysters. She's against the people who do bad things in the name of oysters. It's not the oyster's fault. Okay, so
there's also a problem with the one-size-fits-all approach.
that is always true. And what are you going to do about that?
I'm going to talk to BiCIA just about that problem, and about the fact that most of this discussion is human-oriented, about people, their property, their investments, their infrastructure, and very little about the air we breathe and the food we eat and those kinds of things.
So first of all, the BiCIA isn't a person, or a thing. So it's your report. You could talk to it as much as you want, but it's not going to talk back to you. I am open for this conversation to also be about the environment, as you may have seen in my slide 1 or whatever. We wanted to talk about that, but people frequently are so interested in people. But I think that that's a really important thing, is how do we think about our environment, especially how do we think about the environmental impacts of the things that we are doing, and how do all of those septic systems that I'm making James think about now when he does his next set of maps, how are those going to be changing our marine environment? So there's a ton of that out there. Please go and ask those questions, because those are often the ignored things because we focus so much on the built environment. Okay, so my charges to you are, if we can't pull off doing this effectively on Bainbridge Island, where is this going to happen? We have the opportunity of an informed and motivated citizenry, local government, local agencies, local NGOs. If we can't pull it together for our island, that gives me very little hope for where we're going. So let's actually make these things happen. If you did not verbalize your commitment, you can email it to me. You can dream about it. You can write it on a piece of paper and put it under your pillow, but just do it. The Climate and Energy Forum continues. On June 1st, there's going to be an awesome program across the street at Eagle Harbor Congregational Church, which is where we alternate with, called Youth v. Gov, which is about kids suing about climate change hazards. And that's going to be an awesome program, 10 a.m. to noon. So show up for that. I sadly don't get to be there. And then on June 6th is the final movie that matters for this year, which is from, it's not From the Ashes anymore. I put the Paris to Pittsburgh. Old slide. Paris to Pittsburgh, and then next fall there'll be another series, and we already have like 15 movies that have been recommended, but if you've got one, please send that in an email to me as well. It is, however, June 6th at the library. I want to thank the Good Egg for having us again. I love this space. Thank you, Lena. I want to thank everyone on the organizing committee. People do awesome things, most notably Brian, who actually makes our website have up-to-date content on it. Thank you. And thank you to every one of the representatives from these other entities that sends out notices on their email. If you found out about this because of a flyer, please sign up at what is our website? BainbridgeIslandForum.org. And you can get on the mailing list and you'll get an update. Thank you to James and Stacey. And thank you to all of you for now, and thank you for all of the things that you're going to do when you leave here. This fall, we will have more forums, including hopefully moving on to the next of the solutions topics, looking at transportation. But by this fall, we will also have the greenhouse gas inventory that the city is completing. And we kind of already know what that'll have in it. We burn a whole bunch of stuff, and it makes emissions, and it's bad. So come back this fall, have another drink, chat some more, make some more commitments, and thank you all for coming to join us again.